This is NNI Bites Big Learnings, a podcast where fellow healthcare professionals converse about the latest on nutrition science. We are joined by the chairs and speakers of NNI and WNSC Workshop 102 as they share practical insights on the impact of proper nutrition that contribute in the optimal growth of children.
Hello and welcome to the Nestlé Nutrition Institute podcast NNI Bites. Today we are recording at the Nestlé Nutrition Institute workshop number 102 on Growing Strong, Harnessing the Power of Nutrition for Child Health. I'm your host today. I'm Bertolt Koletzko, Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Munich in Germany, and I'm very pleased to be joined by a wonderful guest, Oraporn Dumrongwongsiri, who is an associate professor at Mahidol University in Thailand, where she also is the head of the Division of Nutrition at the Department of Pediatrics at the Ramatibodi Hospital, Mahidol University. She's also member of the leadership committee of the Pediatric Nutrition Association of Thailand and of the committee of the Thailand Breastfeeding Center. Welcome, Oraporn. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hi.
So the topic that you're addressing here at the workshop is breastfeeding and its health effects and what evidence we have. As pediatricians, we all think that breastfeeding is a natural feeding and the norm that we should promote and protect. But of course, then we are also interested in what do we know about the health effects, which probably is important for us when we talk to families and want to encourage them to breastfeed. So what is the state of the art? What do we know?
Okay, we know that breast milk is the gold standard for infant feeding, and it provides a lot of nutrient and also bioactive factor. And I believe that the natural construct is the best thing for mother to infant. So we know that from the evidence, we found that breastfeeding has a protective effect on the obesity risk in later life, as well as other non-communicable diseases such as diabetes.
So what do these studies show on the effects of breastfeeding on obesity risk? What exactly is there in the literature?
Yeah, the study performed on the association of the infant who were formula-fed and infant who were breastfed, and they compare the prevalence of obesity in later life, including the obesity during the infancy, during the childhood, and also in adulthood. And we found that the risk of obesity is decreasing around 20 to 30% by breastfeeding.
So 20 to 30% is quite an effect size. Now, all these studies, as far as I know, except for one, are really observational studies. And you always wonder what is the risk of bias in observational studies, what is the potential effect of confounders, because we know families who choose to breastfeed are different from those who don't. So what can you say about this potential risk of confounding?
Yeah, as you know that the randomized control trial is the base to perform, but it may be unethical to perform that the randomizing to determine the effect of breastfeeding, that you should classify the breastfed and formula-fed infant. So the study of the breastfeeding effect mostly done performed by the observational study, and the researchers try to decrease the bias as much as they can by including the large participants and the good follow-up, good method of data collection, and also when we have a lot of study enough to perform the meta-analysis, many meta-analyses were performed to determine that association.
Good. Let's look at the results of the different explorations. But before we do that, there was one study that didn't randomize breastfeeding, but the randomized breastfeeding support, the PROVID study initiated by Dr. Michael Kramer from Montreal. And that study also looked at obesity outcomes, didn't it?
Yes.
And it didn't show a measurable effect. So why was that?
Maybe it's because when we support breastfeeding, but the practice of breastfeeding may be different than that we aim in the beginning. So maybe we look through the breastfeeding practice more than the breastfeeding support.
Yeah, and perhaps also at the time of the study in the country of Belarus where it was performed, the breastfeeding went up, but the effect size might not have been big enough to see an effect on obesity, and also the rate of obesity in the country was rather low, so that maybe has to be taken into account. Well, if you look at the studies that explore the effect of adjustment and study quality, I think there was a WHO analysis. What did they show?
Yeah, there's a lot of study on the breastfeeding and later obesity risk. When they include all the study in the meta-analysis, we found that the reduction of the obesity is around 24 to 27%, but because of the bias can be found in the observational study. They perform the analysis, including only a large study and also the high quality one, adjusting for the confounding factor. For example, the socioeconomic status, education level, and the birth parameter or pregnancy history. And then the reduction of the obesity is around not more than 20, maybe 16 to 18% reduction in obesity risk.
Right, so 16 to 18% is not a very big effect size for the individual, but it's still on a public health basis, it's a big benefit if we can reduce 16 to 18% of obesity in the population. That would be really a big benefit for public health and a big saving for healthcare costs, wouldn't it?
I think it's a very good investment if you can promote breastfeeding that you not need for much money, but you can save a lot of budget on the health outcome later life in adulthood.
Is there also an effect of duration of breastfeeding?
Yes, there are also show the dose effect. That many studies show that if you infant with longer breastfeeding time, have a lower risk of the obesity.
Is it important to have the infant exclusively breastfed to see that effect of obesity prevention?
Yes, exclusively breastfed also show lower risk of obesity compared to the mixed breastfeeding.
Okay. What do we know about other outcomes? How about diabetes, which is associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, in the meta-analysis of the World Health Organization also show that it is a reduction around 30% of diabetes in the adulthood in breastfed infant compared to formula fed. But for the serum cholesterol or hypertension, they have no effect on that, the breastfeeding.
So that's important. If we are in a world where diabetes becomes like an explosive disease with a rapidly increasing incidence and prevalence. Now, some women who, for example, go back to work, choose to pump breast milk and feed the breast milk by the bottle. Will that have the same preventive effect?
Yeah, there's also interesting information that the feeding method also have a different outcome on the obesity risk in the breastfed infant. The information show that the breastfed infant who were direct breastfeeding have the lower risk of obesity compared to the infant who were fed by the express breast milk in the bottle. So it's maybe because when we direct breastfeed, The breast milk have a diurnal variation, have a intra-feeding variation like for male high milk, and also the component is changing by the lactational age. So if you direct breastfeeding, maybe some of this property regulate the appetite control or provide the appropriate biofactor, nutrient, and everything for the infant at that time, at that age. And maybe programming the infant to be healthy and decrease the rate of obesity in later life.
That's really an intriguing observation that the effect is different with breastfeeding and with feeding breast milk by bottle. And one then would wonder, what is the mechanism of the protective effect? I mean, you could think of the composition of breast milk, which may be different if you pump milk, because when you pump milk, you probably tend to express the whole milk from the breast and thereby have also the hind milk there, a higher content of fat, a higher content of energy than if the baby just suckles for a little while at the breast. Or the other factor could be it is the method of feeding at the breast, which is obviously different than the bottle. What do you think?
Actually, I think when we direct breastfeeding, infants themselves can determine when to start and when to stop. And also the for male high milk mechanism, when high milk come with the high fat, is also the satiety signal. And it's maybe involved in the attraction of the appetite control in the infant in very, very early life.
And perhaps there's also a difference in the feeder. I have obviously never pumped breast milk, but I assume it's a rather tedious process to do so. And if you have pumped 150 milliliters and then the baby drinks 120, it would be rather painful not to use that and throw it away. And maybe you're tempted to feed then the whole bottle. Is that a potential factor?
Yeah, that's maybe like we force feeding instead of infant themselves can determine that, okay, it's enough, but mother can force them more than they need.
Mm-hmm. What do we know about the milk components, the components in breast milk that maybe are different from those in traditional breast milk substitutes? Are there any indications that they matter?
Yeah, the first thing that different is macronutrient content, especially protein content, that we talk much about the protein. That is very important because we know about the early protein hypothesis, that early higher protein intake during the early life is related to the obesity in later life. So the breast milk protein, the human milk, contain only 1 gram per deciliter, and is lower than other mammal milk and lower than breast milk substitute. So it's maybe one of the mechanisms that explain why the breastfeeding protect us from the obesity in later life.
Yeah, it's a fascinating aspect. Plus, breast milk changes over time, doesn't it? When the growth velocity of the baby decreases with increasing age, also the protein content in the breast milk really decreases quite markedly, whereas typically in a bottle you feed the same amount of protein from birth over several months, don't you?
Yes, that's also one thing that very fascinating, that how can the breast milk can be changed along the infant growth, the lactation period. And we cannot make the breast milk substitute have the property like that.
Yeah. Are there any other attractive hypotheses other than the protein content that may be behind the association of breastfeeding and less obesity later?
Yeah, a lot of studies try to find the answers. There are also the explanation about the epigenetics mechanisms, and we know that obesity is related to genetic factors, and breastfeeding have some biofactors that can modify the gene expression. Nowadays, there's a lot of obesity-related genes that have been studied that as the effect of breastfeeding and epigenetic mechanisms on them. And they are going up in information nowadays that there's a lot of interested genes in the pipeline of the studies. In addition, they also have a hypothesis with the gut microbiota. That we know that the breast milk contains human milk oligosaccharide. That is the factors that shaping our gut microbiota to be a healthy pattern. And nowadays we know that gut microbiota also involved in the obesity risk. And that may be one of the explanation why the obesity breastfeeding can reduce the risk of obesity.
That's a fascinating thought. We obviously have seen many studies showing differences in the gut colonization between breastfed and non-breastfed babies.
Yeah.
And we are coming to appreciate that there's a lot of signals coming from the gut microbiota to the organism, a strong interaction, and it may be very relevant for the biology. By the way, less protein in the diet also changes the gut microbiota, so there's many factors that do influence this. Now, another thought people have voiced is that breastfed infants have a different exposure to flavors and tastes because whatever the mother eats is also affecting the organoleptic properties of the milk. So if you have a wonderful Thai dinner, the spices, the flavors will go into the next milk. Is that a potential effect that changes feeding behavior of the baby short and long term?
Yeah, there was also an evidence showing that when the infant fed by breast milk, they taste a variety of flavor passed through the breast milk, and it's different from the breast milk substitute that is contain only one flavor, the same all the time. But for breast milk, the flavor is different by the diet that mother eat. And the diet that mother eat is mostly the local diet that the infant will be exposed when they grow up. So it's just like a flavor bridge, prepare the infant from the early life to the normal diet in later life. So because the variation of the diet that mother eat, and infant exposed to a variety of the flavor. So the study show that it can lead to the diet diversity that infant eat in later, maybe during the complementary food or early childhood, and it leads to the healthy eating pattern in the infants also.
Yes, absolutely fascinating. There's these studies with more variety of tastes in the complementary feeding period. You have also easier acceptance of other foods later on. The studies by Andrea Meyer and co-workers, absolutely fascinating. Well, we have a lot more to learn, obviously, but what are the key messages for clinical practice that you would draw today? What can we share with the healthcare professionals who counsel mothers?
Yeah, I think the promoting breastfeeding is not only for infant growth or to provide adequate nutrient, but also to invest for the good health in later life of them.
Yeah, promote, protect, and support breastfeeding because it may not only help for good nutrition and for preventing infection, but it also may help to reduce the risk of obesity later. Thank you very much, Oraporn, for this very insightful, wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
That concludes our episode today. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. That was great. And sincere thanks to you, the listeners. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to listen to more episodes, don't forget to subscribe on the Nestlé Nutrition Institute 365 app or the NNI website. Thank you and goodbye.
And that concludes today's episode. Thank you for joining us for this special episode from NNI and WNSC Workshop 102. We hope you enjoyed and learned from this quick discussion, fellow experts. Till the next episode.